why you're on, why we're having a chat this afternoon. Just a little bit of background for those folk who don't know you.
Absolutely. So pleasure to be here this afternoon, or morning if you're in Canada like I am. NatWest are in our Bank of APIs department currently piloting digital identity solutions in the UK market. We are increasingly aware of the opportunity to better serve our customers that digital identity and attribute sharing presents. And the discussion today is really just about how we can continue to help move this market forward with some of the fantastic industry experts on the call.
Fantastic. So you've highlighted the fact we're going to be joining a panel later on, but this is your moment in terms of the chat. And I thought for the start of this conversation, it would be really good to start with the definition. If we're really going to get and try and unpack what digital identity is and what the universality of that is, how would you very briefly define, firstly, a digital identity? How would you define that?
I would define a digital identity as the ability to share certain identity attributes about yourself in a digital manner.
How important is the extra word, the universality of that? Why is that word important as a preceding to the digital identity?
I think it's incredibly important because universality of a digital identity means that an individual would be able to use that same digital identity across a number of different use cases and businesses, rather than having to, potentially set up individual digital identities dependent on the use case or the business that individual wanted to interact with. So the universality of the identity solution provides that customer or that individual with the opportunity to reuse credentials that they've already set up and streamline their journeys even further.
Fantastic. I think we'll probably circle back to that in the panel in terms of friction and friction-free, and like streaming apps and bank apps and ID and passwords. You've got a way of bringing that together in a very universal way. Otherwise, we won't see adoption. But we're going to cover that in the panel later on. But let's just sort of frame the conversation. Having dealt with the definition, let's frame the conversation with sort of the problem statement. What is the issue or the problem or the pain point that we're trying to solve with this concept of a digital ID?
I think that problem and pain point could be looked at from a number of different angles. I'll start with the consumer angle or the customer angle. Currently, if an individual is going through a journey digitally, there are multiple points in which that individual will have to either share information about themselves. This could be through, filling out long forms that include their attributes such as name, date of birth, address, phone number, email, and even more. And also potentially uploading scans of photo ID that individual holds to prove that it is themselves in that journey. And that's all before, you potentially get to the point of a payment being made if this is within an e-commerce type of journey. So that individual have to go through, sometimes it's quite streamlined and it's 5 to 6 clicks. Sometimes it's 10 or 11 clicks of a flow where that user is being asked for different bits of information to read different elements of kind of consent signing up to with them sharing this information with this third party. And that creates an incredibly friction-filled journey that individual has to go through every time they want to access a goods or services online. Now, there's obviously fantastic examples of companies that take a really user-driven approach when they're designing these flows. But for the most part, your generic e-commerce site, it is quite friction-filled still. Secondly, kind of when you're approaching it from a business perspective, that journey can be wrought with fraud points, manually taking a scan of a photo ID, for instance, from a customer, or the customer pre-filling their own direct debit and sort code details manually, the potential for user error or the potential for fraudulent players to type in incorrect direct debit details and defraud a company. So digital identity can help ensure that it is actually that user that individual in that journey trying to access that goods or service. So there's benefits for both parties there.
Thanks for that. And when we talk in the panel, we're going to be talking about some examples of things that have been happening in different geographies and here in the UK. But I guess to help us frame the rest of this fireside chat and that panel conversation, where there are lots of ID solutions available in the market, and where are they missing the mark? You know, where are the gaps that need to be filled?
I think in the UK market specifically, the big gap is around trust and education. So from an individual's perspective, it's the need for that individual to understand what this identity solution provider does, how they are accredited, what that accreditation mean, you know, what is the UK's trust framework? What does that mean to me as an individual if a company is certified under that framework? And as part of that, it's brand trust, which is, you know, the opportunity that I think that banks have here as trusted institutes and custodians of individuals' data and money at the end of the day. So I think that the emergence of digital identity solution providers in the UK is fantastic. We're seeing, you know, kind of different ways of approaching digital identity solutions, but without that trust, that consumer trust or brand trust, it's going to be increasingly hard to drive adoption, and the onus is on the individual to understand what a trust framework is and how that identity solution provider is operating within that framework. And I think that is the, you know, kind of biggest missed mark of the emerging identity solution providers in the UK market.
Thank you. And so as we position the sort of the definition, the problem statement, Daniel's asking a question, and it really relates to what you've just said in terms of where people might be missing the mark. And the suggestion from Daniel is that there's been slow adoption in the UK. Would you say that we've had slow adoption to digital ID in the UK?
Absolutely. And I think that goes very strongly to Helen's points in the intro to this session as well, that there is a bit of a reticence with the UK population around digital identity and data sharing and the implications of data sharing and its, you know, potential negative connotation that's attached to it. And I think that is one of the primary reasons for this slower adoption in the UK. I also, you know, think that there's possibly an element of the education piece that I was mentioning there as well. What exactly is a digital identity? What does it mean to me? What are the use cases? Where can I use this, and how will it actually improve my experiences? I think that better education in those angles will help drive that adoption forwards. And I know we'll talk more about adoption in a minute, so that's just my initial thoughts on it.
So as you sort of start to expand on what the market might look like and how different players are looking at this, would you say that players are coming from different angles on the subject, all looking for a digital ID, but would you say that people are approaching it from a different way?
Absolutely, I would, and you know, I do describe the UK market as an emerging market here. I think that there's two primary routes of looking at digital identity in the UK right now that I'm seeing. The first one is based on document upload and using a verified government issued photo identity document to form a credential that sits within a third party's identity solution app or wallet, if you like. So essentially, you know, a scan of your passport or your driving license, and that being assigned to you as an individual as an identity credential. We're seeing some good traction in that space. You know, a great example of this is Yoti in the UK market. And secondly, I think that there is, you know, the bank-based identity approach, which is where NatWest are currently playing in pilot with OneID, who are an identity solution provider in this space. And essentially that allows an individual to reuse their bank identity credentials that are stored securely within their bank. And they can then choose to pass those through to a third party via a trusted identity solution provider that sits within this UK's trust framework as well. That in that instance, your banking app essentially acts as your identity wallet, if you like, as well.
Just thinking about what you just said about banking apps there, I wanted to ask you a question around adoption. What would we need to solve that issue to, as we solve those issues, to gain widespread adoption? And we've had an anonymous question, but a question also asked about from the audience has talked about the role of education. How do we educate businesses? So as we think about adoption, how would we gain widespread adoption of a universal digital ID?
So I think that you've kind of got a trifecta here. You have adoption, you have trust, and you have the use cases all kind of aligned in a circle there. And you have to kind of get one right to get them all in, and that would lead to widespread adoption. Now, I think that the adoption angle depends on the identity solution. So if we talk about bank-based identity for a second, if I was to use a bank-based identity solution when I'm signing up for a social media site, let's say in the first instance, am I going to associate my bank with that particular use case? Is that going to feel a bit funny or a bit strange to me as a consumer? Quite likely. But within the realm of, for instance, payments, I expect my bank to be present in that journey. Therefore, I expect a bank-based identity solution to be present in that journey for me. So I think it really does come from the use case approach and where customers expect the identity to be. And that's what helps with the education angle as well. Because if I expect it there, then it doesn't feel as strange to me. And then once I start to use it in those use cases where I expect it, and it progresses into additional use cases, this is very much the model that we're seeing with Bank ID in the Nordics in particular. I'm then more comfortable with using that identity solution in other use cases, such as social media login. I think that that there's a part for government to play in this space as well in driving adoption and use cases. It's mean in Belgium that their digital identity solution, one of the primary that is now the primary login method for the Belgian government website, and also with an open banking lens, HMRC is probably, Helen will correct me if I'm wrong here, but definitely the key adoption drive for open banking payments in the UK. So there's really a role for the public sector to play in driving adoption as well, which I think again builds on that trust and that education and that trifecta that I mentioned at the start.
Fantastic. And you just referenced open banking, and Helen, I think my last question to you before we get together about the open banking, we're in front of the open banking excellence community. Folk are heavily involved and engaged in this space. What's the role of open banking data in this whole subject of digital ID?
Yeah, so I think that the open banking is the key that could unlock digital identity in the UK, because it is, most of the UK banks are already plugged in and sharing data in a standardized format through standardized rails. That is an incredible infrastructure that can be leveraged with capabilities beyond. So if, from a consumer perspective, this would mean that my journey to retrieve my bank account information from Bank A should be virtually the same as my journey to retrieve that bank account information from Bank B. So if Bank A and Bank B allowed for additional attributes, identity attributes, to be shared in the exact same manner that I'm sharing that account information, such as my sort code and account number, I, as a consumer, and them are then able to share those identity attributes in the safe and trusted way that I already use to share my bank details. It's an incredible rails that's already established, already has adoption and an element of trust around it, because at the end of the day, I, as a consumer, am sharing this data from a trusted brand that I choose to bank with. So I think that open banking lets all the rails be present in the journey for consumers to then use.
Fantastic. Building on the fantastic achievements of open banking, that's great to hear. We're just going to round up, and I guess just as we round up this fireside chat, there was sort of a tagline to today's thing and it said, was it myth or reality? And if I think about the reality of banking as or digital, very quickly, Stacey, what's possible? What's the art of the possible as we think? If we were to think big about a digital ID and the universality of that, what's possible? What we should be gunning for? What should our moonshot be?
I think that we should be gunning for an incredibly widely adopted, reusable identity credentials that I can store within my trusted bank that I've chosen. I don't just mean the attributes that a bank holds on me. It would be, fantastic to be able to store additional identity credentials within that same place, and essentially use my bank as that trusted custodian. So things such as, my photo ID, my employment records, anything that I choose to store there for the purpose of reuse.